Director Phillips refused to evacuate 200 kids as flames closed in, pushed my phone away. When I showed him the alert and said, "I'm not ruining this camp's reputation over a maybe," I stayed silent. That was 11 months ago. This morning, his widow called me in tears after reading his journals. "Did you ever have to choose between keeping your job and doing the right thing?" I'd been a camp counselor for 5 summers, but I'd never seen the sky turn that sick orange color before noon. The forest fire was supposedly 20 miles away, but the ash was already falling like snow, and my group of 12-year-olds kept asking why the sun looked bloody through the smoke. I ran to the main office where Director Phillips was on a conference call with the camp's board of directors, and through his window, I could see him pointing at financial charts while the Forest Service evacuation alert blared on his radio. When he finally hung up, I told him we needed to get the kids out now because the wind was pushing the fire straight toward us. Phillips stood up and put his hand on my shoulder like I was one of the campers having a panic attack. "Ryan, I've run this camp for 15 years, and we've never evacuated for a fire that was 20 miles away. And I'm not starting now when we have parents paying $4,000 a week for their kids to be here." I tried to show him the emergency alert on my phone that said, "Evacuate immediately," but he literally pushed my phone away. He said if I mentioned the fire to any of the kids or tried to scare them, I'd be fired on the spot, and he'd make sure I never worked with children again. By lunch, the smoke was so thick that kids were coughing during outdoor activities, and I could hear the younger ones crying in their cabins because their eyes were burning. I found 3 other counselors in the dining hall, and we all agreed this was insane, but Phillips had the van keys locked in his office, and the camp buses needed special keys that only he and the drivers had. That's when we saw the actual flames on the ridge above the camp, maybe 2 miles away, and moving fast with a wind pushing it straight down the valley toward us. I sprinted back to Phillips's office and found him on another call, this time with parents, assuring them that the media was exaggerating and their children were completely safe. When he hung up, I pointed at the burning ridge and said we had maybe an hour before those flames hit camp. He slammed his hand on his desk and screamed, "You're just a college kid who doesn't understand liability and reputation, and if you cause a panic that gets a child hurt during an unnecessary evacuation, their parents will sue us into bankruptcy." The power went out right then because the fire had hit the power lines, and Phillips still insisted it was just a precaution by the power company. That's when I knew I had to do something to protect these kids, because clearly he wasn't going to. I remembered that the maintenance shed had a spare set of bus keys hidden behind the tool cabinet because the janitor told me about it last summer. I ran through the smoke that was now so thick I could barely see the trail, and my lungs felt like they were full of campfire. The keys were right where Greg said, and I sprinted to the bus parking area where another counselor was already trying to break into one with a rock. I held up the keys and said, "We're getting everyone out right now," and she actually started crying with relief. We drove the buses right up to the cabins and started loading kids, and I'll never forget this 8-year-old camper asking me if we were going to die while Ash covered his Spider-Man backpack. Other counselors started helping once they saw what we were doing, and we managed to get all 200 kids loaded in about 15 minutes of absolute chaos. Phillips came running out of his office screaming that we were all fired and he was calling the police to arrest us for kidnapping, but my coworker just looked at him and said, "Dude, look behind you." The entire ridge was on fire, and you could hear trees exploding from the heat. We drove those buses down the mountain road going way too fast, but the fire was literally racing us down the hillside, jumping from tree to tree like something out of a disaster movie. In my rearview mirror,